The world saw a smiling Prince George waving to a crowd outside Buckingham Palace, but within seconds, the cheers turned into stunned gasps. Cameras caught it. Microphones picked it up. A single, chilling statement from a child and the palace guards snapped to attention. What did he say? And why did it shake the monarchy to its core? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Royal aides surged forward, visibly alarmed. One reached for the prince's shoulder, only to be waved off with a look that seemed far older than his years. Just as suddenly, the live feed cut. Black. Nothing. Broadcasters quickly shifted focus, offering flimsy explanations, technical issues, crowd control. But the internet exploded. What had George said? Why had the guards obeyed? Within hours, speculation turned into full-blown hysteria. Was this a well-timed prank, a planted phrase, or something far more deliberate? The palace issued a cold, calculated response. No comment. And that silence was louder than any denial. Forums lit up with theories, some laughable, others unsettlingly plausible. Was George conditioned? Was this a signal? Who had trained him, and why? Witnesses who had been close enough to hear claimed the phrase was not in modern English. Some swore it sounded Latin, others believed it was an ancient royal order. But nearly all agreed on one detail: his tone. There was no childish playfulness, no confusion. It was as if he knew exactly what he was doing. He sounded like a ruler, one bystander said, not a prince. A king. Behind the gates, sources whispered that the guards' reaction wasn't spontaneous, it was protocol. Buried deep within their code of conduct was a command, long forgotten by the public, that could only be triggered by specific words. Words tied to a royal bloodline's deeper history. Words that had been dormant for centuries. Security footage was confiscated. Footage from tourists disappeared from platforms mysteriously. And for those within the royal circle, panic simmered beneath the surface. Had George been reading classified archives? Was he coached? Or worse, was he acting on instinct, unaware of how deeply his words pierced into royal tradition? The monarchy, already bruised by scandals and division, now faced an internal storm no one had prepared for. But while the world watched a single moment of shock, they missed the crucial truth lying just beneath the surface. But what the crowd didn't know, what only the guards seemed to understand, is that this wasn't the first time George had uttered these words. Inside the polished walls of royal nurseries, beneath the delicate lullabies and quiet hum of bedtime stories, there had always been whispers that carried through the generations of staff sworn to silence. But with Prince George, the whispers took on a new edge. The nannies, who had served countless heirs before him, began to notice something disturbingly different. Night after night, George would mutter in his sleep, never the babble of a dreaming child, but full, articulate sentences. Not just articulate, commanding. The cadence was ceremonial, ritualistic, as if he were delivering orders to an invisible court. One nanny reportedly left her post in the middle of the night, shaken by a phrase she couldn't understand but instinctively feared. "He said it like he meant it," she whispered to a colleague later, "and I didn't recognize the language but the weight of it." The weight chilled me. Soon, murmurs spread through the household staff. George had been overheard repeating sequences of words that mirrored ancient coronation, oaths, phrases that hadn't been spoken publicly since the era of Henry VIII. A particularly startled footman filed an internal report, claiming the young prince had looked him dead in the eye and issued a directive, in what he later described as antique military phrasing. The order was firm, formal, almost coded. The footman left his post shortly after. While the palace publicly dismissed the incident as a misunderstanding, the internal atmosphere had begun to shift. Beneath the surface of royal tradition, something peculiar had taken root. A royal child psychologist, one of the few allowed regular access to George, quietly flagged what she termed premature dominance behavior. According to confidential records, The boy's psychological profile reflected unusual traits for his age: exceptionally high assertiveness, instinctive leadership under pressure, and a notable lack of emotional dependency. On more than one occasion, he had referred to himself not as a prince, but in a tone that hinted at finality, as though his ascension was not a possibility, but a memory. The warnings, though subtle, reached the higher echelons of the family, and yet, as always, the royal response was divided. Catherine, fiercely protective and publicly maternal, dismissed the oddities as nothing more than imagination, fueled by isolation. "It's a phase," she reportedly told an aide. "He's curious, he reads too much." But those closer to the old guard were less convinced. Charles, the reigning monarch, allegedly grew uneasy. His visits with George became more formal, less playful. A source within the royal household claimed the king once confided, "He knows names I've never spoken aloud. Names of past royals, long buried. Names that hadn't surfaced in palace conversation for decades." George would mention them in passing, as if recalling old friends, weaving their titles into play with eerie precision. The palace tried to contain it all, brushing away the rising anxiety with carefully controlled PR appearances. But the tension simmered. Every whispered story, every report dismissed, only amplified the question no one dared ask aloud. What exactly was awakening inside the young prince? He wasn't learning history. He was living it. And yet, what no one had anticipated was that these cryptic utterances would escalate and soon reveal a connection to a forbidden royal prophecy. Long before George's name echoed across royal nurseries and parade grounds, there was another name one erased from the court's records and whispered only among the most arcane scholars of the crown. In 1589, under the dim candlelight of the Tudor court, a royal astrologer named Alaric Dane presented a prophecy so disturbing it cost him his place among the elite. He warned of a monarch yet unborn, a child wrapped in silence and shadow, who would rise not by succession, but by fate. "The silver child," he wrote, "will speak, and the iron shall move." A chilling line, ignored then, but now resurrected with violent relevance. For centuries, that document was believed to be destroyed. But hidden in a forgotten compartment within the royal collection, it had waited. And when George uttered his cryptic command, the exact phrase the prophecy was no longer folklore. It was a warning fulfilled. What terrified the crown wasn't merely the coincidence of language, it was the stars. The prophecy detailed an astrological pattern so rare it was dismissed as myth, a celestial convergence of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury in mirrored retrograde, coupled with a blood moon. That alignment occurred only once in recorded British history. On the night George was born. Royal astrologers, long relegated to ceremonial roles, were suddenly summoned in secret. George's birth chart, when laid against Alaric's forbidden scrolls, was an exact match. Not close. Exact. A map of destiny forged centuries before his first breath. But this was no cause for celebration. The prophecy foretold the silver child would not bring peace, but division. He would rise when the monarchy was fractured, when the crown tips and the people lose faith. Within the palace, unease spread like wildfire. Internal documents, sealed by King George V himself, were quietly unearthed. A dossier titled Project Hollow Crown referenced "a child who brings the reckoning." Cryptic passages spoke of a future heir who would speak in the voice of kings and awaken ancestral memory. Rumors swirled that the king had received a private letter from a spiritualist in 1936, warning of a royal born in the early 21st century who would bend history without knowing why. Until now, it had been dismissed as wartime superstition. Now, it read like a prophecy fulfilled. The royal inner circle fractured. Some believed George was chosen. Others feared he was cursed. Behind the grand smiles of public appearances, two camps emerged. One quietly preparing for George's accelerated rise to power, and another strategizing how to delay or even suppress it. They could no longer treat his words as accidents. They were signals. And as George grew older, those signals only grew stronger. The guards who moved, the voices he echoed, the eyes that seemed to see too much, none of it could be ignored any longer. But within those gilded walls, secrecy could only shield the monarchy for so long. Panic was rising, and action was inevitable. The palace couldn't afford another prophecy realized by accident. They needed clarity. They needed proof. As the palace grappled with this ancient omen, someone decided the boy needed to be tested, and that led to an invitation with chilling consequences. Buried beneath the centuries-old foundations of Windsor Castle lies a chamber so secretive it exists in neither blueprint nor archive. Known only to reigning monarchs and their designated successors, it is a space designed not for ceremony, but for revelation. The Chamber of Succession, as it is called in whispers, has been used just 4 times in the last 200 years. It is not a place of instruction, it is a crucible. A test of psychological resilience, ancestral intuition, and regal instinct. And now, for the first time in living memory, the doors opened for a child. George, just 8 years old, was led there without warning. They told him it was a game. They told him nothing that would prepare him for what he was about to face. Because nothing could. Inside the chamber, time stands still. There are no modern fixtures, no signs of the present. Only relics of kings long dead, their faces staring down from soot-darkened portraits, and walls etched with coded language from reigns erased by time. A single table bore items meant to provoke confusion. A tarnished crown with an inscription in Latin, a sealed scroll bearing Elizabeth I's private insignia, and a letter addressed to the future. The room is designed to overwhelm, to rattle even the most prepared royal mind. Hidden within the chamber is a psychological trigger, buried in the scroll, calibrated to elicit emotional collapse. It had been tested before grown men had wept. But George didn't flinch. Instead, he walked calmly to the scroll, opened it, and began reading aloud a decree first issued in 1631 under King Charles I, word for word. No hesitation, no stumble. The guards monitoring the footage reportedly froze in disbelief. A royal aide, upon hearing the boy continue into a section written in formal early modern English, fainted. George's voice was steady, cold, detached. When he finished, he looked directly into the observation lens and asked, "What's next?" Not frightened, not confused. Ready. The footage was immediately sealed. Access restricted to only 3 individuals within the palace. Staff were sworn into emergency non-disclosure agreements. One guard, who later left his post citing unrecoverable psychological distress, leaked a single sentence to a tabloid contact before vanishing from public view. He didn't react like a boy. He reacted like he'd been there before. Inside the monarchy, that sentence tore through generations of tradition like a blade through silk. What kind of child recites royal decrees not taught in any curriculum? What kind of child navigates a psychological trial designed for grown kings and passes? Questions festered in corners of the royal household. Was George merely brilliant, or was something ancient alive inside him? The line between natural aptitude and inherited memory began to blur. Reports surfaced that following the chamber test, George became more withdrawn, but more exacting, sharper in speech, colder in gaze. Some called it maturity, others called it awakening. And yet, behind closed doors, those who had once mocked the prophecy of the Silver Child now reviewed it word by word. Because from that day forward, whispers within the royal household grew louder. Catherine had always been the protective force behind her son, fiercely guarding his innocence against the ever-looming shadow of the crown. She had insisted on bedtime stories over briefing folders, playdates over protocol. But everything changed after the chamber. The boy she tucked into bed came back, altered. She began to withdraw. At public events, her once radiant smile dimmed, replaced by a tension she could no longer conceal. Those closest to her described a woman unraveling behind palace walls, caught in a storm no mother could prepare for. Then came the leak, an audio recording from a private conversation, never meant for the public. In it, her voice cracked through sobs. "He's not normal, he's too prepared." The rawness in her tone wasn't fear of power, it was fear for her child, fear that the boy she birthed was becoming something beyond her reach. The palace closed ranks, but whispers spiraled. Catherine had confronted Charles in private, demanding that George be quietly removed from the line of succession. She begged him to act not as a king, but as a grandfather. But Charles, bound by duty and riddled with his own doubts, refused. William found himself caught between two truths, his loyalty to tradition and his loyalty to his wife. The tension fractured their once unshakable bond. Behind closed doors, arguments turned heated, accusations turned personal. Catherine, desperate and isolated, crossed a line no royal spouse had dared before. She sought help from an outside psychological consultant, an act strictly forbidden without crown approval. It wasn't just a breach of protocol, it was a plea for deliverance. But what chilled her most wasn't the crown's silence, it was George himself. At home, he began correcting her, his tone formal, clipped, disturbingly regal. When she asked him to tidy his room, he responded with, "That is not within the scope of my responsibility." When she questioned his tone, he stared back and said, "I'm only preparing." Friends, said Catherine, began to withdraw even further, cancelling engagements, refusing overnight stays at the palace. In the sanctuary of whispered conversations, she called her own son haunted. Not evil, not ill, haunted, possessed by something older, colder, more commanding than childhood should allow. Aides reported moments when she would sit silently in the nursery, watching him from a distance, not with adoration but with uncertainty. One staffer claimed she whispered to herself, "That's not the boy I raised." And while her cries were dismissed publicly, behind the scenes, cracks in the firmament were beginning to spread. Catherine's instinct wasn't merely emotional, it was ancestral. There was something unnatural blooming inside George. And though she couldn't name it, she could feel its pull, and it terrified her. But Catherine wasn't the only one feeling threatened. The guards had begun to change formation around George, as if responding to something only they could sense. The guards of the royal household are trained with one unwavering principle: loyalty to the sovereign and the sovereign alone. They do not deviate, they do not improvise. Their movements are calculated, rehearsed, and rooted in centuries of ceremonial precision. Yet within weeks of George's chamber test, something strange began to happen. Something no protocol could explain. CCTV footage, captured by internal security systems and quietly reviewed by the palace's operations team, revealed subtle but unmistakable shifts. Guards would reposition ever so slightly when George entered a room. Feet snapped to attention, eyes locked forward. Their bodies adjusted, not in response to orders from their commanding officer, but to him. A child. He never raised his voice. He never shouted. He barely spoke. But the words he did use were clear, measured, and oddly commanding. "Hold," he'd say, and they did. "Wait," he whispered, and they froze. At first, senior officials dismissed the footage as coincidence, but patterns began to emerge. Guards posted along George's walking paths adjusted before his approach, sometimes seconds in advance, as though reacting to a signal before it was audibly given. The Royal Military Liaison quietly launched a formal inquiry, desperate to understand whether a new system of silent communication had been introduced without authorization. What they found was more troubling. Some of the guards claimed they weren't following orders at all. "It's not instruction," one said. "It's instinct. He speaks, and something in us just responds." A former Coldstream guard, now living in quiet retirement in Northumberland, agreed to an anonymous interview. His voice trembled as he confessed. "He made me kneel. I didn't even realize I'd done it until my knee hit the stone. He never yelled, never commanded, just said it." Internal reshuffling followed swiftly. Several senior guards, those who reported experiencing cognitive dissonance around George, were quietly reassigned or dismissed. No official reason was given, and yet whispers spread of strange testing behind palace walls, recordings of George's voice being analysed by defence contractors. One leaked report suggested his vocal frequency, particularly under emotional stress, mimicked tones used in high-level wartime command drills, historically effective in conditioning troops for immediate action. Science alone couldn't explain it, but the results were consistent enough to warrant panic behind closed doors. What was happening was not tradition. It was transmission. Within the military, high-ranking officers began asking dangerous questions. Was George exhibiting an advanced form of tactical influence? Was this genetic, psychological, or something far more unexplainable? Even Parliament stirred, as murmurs of a compromised chain of command reached intelligence circles. MI5 requested closed-door access to the palace's behavioural reports on George access they were denied. And inside the monarchy, the walls grew tighter, the silence heavier, as the boy walked with increasing autonomy and his mere presence shifted the very ground of royal authority. But for all the speculation, all the concern, nothing could prepare the family or the nation for what came next. Because as the guards fell under his spell, questions arise in the military, in Parliament, and even inside MI5. But nothing could prepare the family for George's next move, a direct confrontation with his grandfather, King Charles. It began with silence. Not the kind that follows childhood disobedience, but the kind that warns of something ancient, deliberate, and irreversible. George stood before King Charles in the private study of Balmoral, holding a scroll sealed in wax so old it cracked beneath his fingers. Where he found it remained a mystery. Some say he accessed the restricted wing of the Royal Archives without clearance. Others insist he was let in by someone high enough to regret it later. But what mattered wasn't how he got it, it was what it contained. A document long buried in the annals of monarchy, outlining the gravest errors ever committed by sovereigns who forgot the sacred balance of the crown. With unsettling calm, George laid the parchment before his grandfather and recited, line by line, the ancient accusations of diminished authority, of broken codes, and of thrones made hollow through the dilution of tradition. When he finished, he looked the king in the eye and said, "You are drifting from the bloodline's command." For a moment, King Charles didn't respond. The room, draped in power, felt smaller, older, weighed down by something neither ceremonial nor political, something spiritual. Then, as if jolted into action, Charles snapped. He demanded to know how George had accessed such documents, who had aided him, who had trained him to speak like that. But George didn't flinch. He simply responded, "I read what you forgot." The boldness was not performative. It was precise, measured, regal. It was not a child's rebellion, it was a bloodline's confrontation. Charles, shaken, ordered that George be barred from attending upcoming diplomatic briefings and select ceremonial duties. But the moment the order was issued, George defied it. He showed up anyway. Guards didn't stop him. Staff didn't question him. And those who tried found themselves outmaneuvered by a boy who spoke like a king in waiting. William, caught in the crossfire, refused to intervene. His silence was interpreted by many as quiet consent. Some say he was torn between loyalty to his father and the terrifying awareness that his son may already be beyond control. Aides reported tense moments between the two men, with William warning Charles privately, "The more you resist him, the more the crown bends around him." And yet, it was Charles's own words, spoken to a trusted confidant, that left the deepest scar. "He frightens me," the monarch admitted. "He knows too much." Inside the palace, George's presence became a gravitational force. Conversations paused when he entered. Royal protocol began adjusting around him, not because of title, but because of influence. This wasn't about hierarchy anymore. It was about energy, power, fate. The monarchy was splitting not in structure, but in spirit. And as the cracks widened, As questions of control and lineage turned to whispers of succession and prophecy, the winds shifted once more. The monarchy, already weakened in public standing, now faced an internal war. And then a letter surfaced that threatened to destroy everything. It was never meant to be found. Hidden deep within Queen Elizabeth II's private writing desk, a compartment so discreet it had evaded even the most thorough security inspections, sat an envelope, sealed with black wax and marked in her own handwriting, to be opened when the proponents, Silver Child, speaks. For decades it had remained untouched, buried among mundane correspondence and forgotten stationery. But one archivist, conducting a routine cataloguing of the late Queen's estate, opened the compartment by accident. What she found wasn't a relic, it was a warning, a single-page letter that shattered everything the monarchy believed about its own future. The archivist immediately alerted her superior. Within an hour, the letter was placed into the hands of King Charles. The contents, as later leaked by a disillusioned aide, were both chilling and prophetic. The letter confirmed the unthinkable. Elizabeth had known of the Silver Child prophecy, not in fragments, not in rumour, in detail. She had not dismissed it as superstition. She had prepared for it. Written in measured but unmistakably urgent language, the Queen described the signs to look for the speech, the aura, the unnatural composure. She named George directly, referring to him as the catalyst, not the threat, not the saviour, the catalyst, the one who would trigger the unravelling or the rebirth. She warned of severed loyalties ahead, cautioning that even the most loyal would falter when the line between duty and destiny blurred. The letter did not advise a plan of succession. It outlined one for collapse, a detailed strategy for dismantling the monarchy from within if the prophecy spiraled out of control. It included contacts, exit protocols, safe houses, instructions for what to do should the bloodline split itself. When Charles read the letter, he reportedly turned white. In private, he summoned William. What followed was one of the most volatile father-son confrontations in royal history. William, already fracturing under the emotional weight of his son's metamorphosis, allegedly begged his father to destroy the letter. He saw it not as guidance, but as a curse, a document that would haunt the institution and their family for generations. But Charles refused. He placed the letter into the royal vault, behind 3 layers of biometric locks. Not for the public, not for Parliament, not even for George, and yet, secrets within the palace do not stay sealed for long. Word of the letter's existence leaked to an inner circle of aides, one of whom took the risk of documenting its content anonymously. That record made its way to a former royal historian who recognized the phrase "Silver Child" and pieced together the missing threads. The press never saw the document, but they didn't have to. The rumors alone were enough to ignite national chaos. Was the Queen guiding from beyond the grave? Had she seen this coming all along? And if so, why had she kept it hidden? As whispers grew louder and loyalties began to falter, the British public found itself standing on the edge of a precipice. It was no longer about George's behaviour. It was about what had been set in motion long before he was born. Now the nation is divided. Protect the monarchy as it is, or allow a child to claim destiny foretold in blood and starfire. The nation stood at a crossroads, its breath held not by scandal or ceremony, but by the growing shadow of a boy who had become more than just an heir. He had become a question, a reckoning. Prince George, once seen as the innocent future of a fractured family, now sat in the eye of a political and spiritual storm. With every passing hour, the debate intensified, louder, messier, more volatile. Headlines called for answers. Was this the moment to step aside and let destiny unfold? Should Charles abdicate, allowing a force of prophecy and power to take the throne early? Or should the monarchy intervene and suppress a rising they no longer understood? There were no easy answers, only tremors through every level of the institution. Within the walls of Parliament, whispers turned to fury. Some ministers backed the idea of early coronation, seeing in George a symbol that might restore belief in the crown's divine mystique. Others feared what his reign might mean, not in policy, but in essence. "What happens?" one diplomat reportedly asked. "When the crown no longer chooses the monarch, but the monarch becomes the crown itself." Abroad, embassies watched with unease. George's influence, though unspoken officially, was felt across Europe, triggering quiet inquiries, subtle warnings, and behind-the-scenes diplomacy. Foreign leaders asked not if George would be king, but when and whether they'd be negotiating with a monarch or something more profound. Meanwhile, the royal household crumbled beneath the weight of division. William and Catherine, once a symbol of unity and stability, now stood on opposite shores of a widening rift. William, slow to act, remained cautious, seeking counsel and time. Catherine, consumed by what she'd witnessed, urged for intervention. She feared what might happen if no one stepped in. She feared what might happen if someone did. Neither path felt safe anymore. And at the center of it all stood George, unbothered, unreadable, undeterred. He no longer moved like a child. He moved like history. Then, without warning, George spoke. Addressing the press for the first time on record, his statement was brief but unforgettable. "The crown doesn't wait," he said. "It remembers." 6 words. No more. But they echoed through the corridors of power like a prophecy finally spoken aloud. There was no plea for recognition, no ambition, just inevitability. The monarchy was no longer a question of lineage. It had become a question of legacy, and legacy, now, had found its voice in the one who could not be ignored. And as the palace looms in silence, the world watches the boy who commands kings and wonders. Is this the dawn of a new royal era, or the final chapter of a dynasty unraveling from within? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.